Welcome to Thresholds of Consciousness, conversations on dreams, non-ordinary reality, and transformation. In this series, I speak with clinicians, researchers, authors, teachers, and artists about the personal experiences that have shaped their work. Together, we explore what they've learned about the nature of consciousness and the healing process. In this episode, I speak with consciousness studies pioneer, Dr. Stanley Krippner. Stanley Krippner is an American psychologist and internationally recognized authority on dreams, consciousness, and anomalous experiences. He has authored or edited dozens of books exploring the boundaries of human awareness. A recipient of multiple Lifetime Achievement Awards, Krippner is known for bridging scientific research with cross-cultural and Indigenous perspectives, contributing significantly to the fields of transpersonal psychology and consciousness studies. He has written a memoir on his life and exploits entitled A Chaotic Life, Memoirs of Stanley Krippner, Pioneering Humanistic Psychologist. Well, Stan, thank you so much for being willing to talk to me.
Thank you for having me.
And, reading through your memoir is just it's mind-boggling, everything that you've participated in. You've done so much in your career. What was it like for you to write the memoir, to revisit all your experiences?
Well, it was not my idea. It was at the request of a publisher, and fortunately, I had been keeping pretty complete notes for decades. And so I was able to go back and review the notes and come up with the 50 chapters that I just had to leave out 8 years. And the publisher left out another 8 years from the bound version. So what you read is truncated, but better than nothing.
You had been keeping a journal or other notes throughout your life.
Yes.
Is it that you went back through a notebook and you just started piecing things together? Or did you have to write separate sections to
I
make it?
had a notebook for every year.
Was there anything that surprised you as you read through the notebooks?
There were a lot of surprises. It was interesting to see how things fit together and important events that spilled off into other important events, and I would not have made the connection had I not written the memoir.
Can you give an example of that, one such event?
When I was about 14 years of age, I wanted to contact my one rich relative to borrow money from him to buy a set of encyclopedia. And I thought, no, I cannot ask money from him. He's dead. Well, that was a complete surprise. At that moment, my mother was screaming downstairs, saying, "Your Uncle Max has just died." My Uncle Max was only in his 40s, had no history of ailments, and so that got me interested in what became parapsychology. And I started to read information on the topic, and that is how my parapsychological career got launched. I can give you any number of examples. There was a comic strip I read as a kid, Mandarin the Magician, and he solved crimes through hypnosis. That got me interested in hypnosis. So I started to read information on the popular press on hypnosis, and that would launch my hypnosis career. In 1957, I read a Life magazine article searching for the magic mushrooms about a curandera in Mexico who was using psychedelic psilocybin mushrooms in her healing that intrigued me. That is what launched my psychedelic career. So those are all surprises, and so much of my life has been a spin-off. Very little in my life was deliberately planned. When I deliberately planned something, it didn't materialize.
That itself seems like a profound commentary on life. I wonder if there's any conclusion that you draw from that, that the things you planned didn't go as planned and the things you didn't plan ended up to open these doors and avenues for you.
Well, it reinforces my interest in chaos theory, because in chaos theory, things do not go cause and effect. They don't go in a linear fashion. A number of little chance occurrences can have major effects. And that's really the story of my life.
And is that why you chose to title it A Chaotic Life?
Exactly.
Yeah. Was there anything else that, as you were compiling these notes from over the years, that allowed you to see certain themes more clearly, in addition to the chaos theory aspect?
Let me count the ways. When my mother and father took me for music lessons every week, I had no idea how important that was. Nobody else in that neighborhood was taking music lessons, and they took me to a relative who taught piano lessons, and week after week, I took piano lessons. And that got me interested in all types of music. First of all, in classical music, but eventually in rock and roll. So my immersion in music was due to my parents going out of their way to get me lessons, which I just took for granted at the time. But now I certainly have gone overboard paying them thanks and gratitude for giving me those music lessons. I mean, music has been a defining aspect of my life, and it's brought me so much joy and so much pleasure. And I never would have gotten such immersion without actually taking the lessons myself. Not that I ever became a piano virtuoso, but at least I was able to appreciate what went into a musical composition. And then, of course, another chance event got me interested in rock and roll and the Grateful Dead. I was having a conversation with Mickey Hart at his request because he wanted to find out if he was using guided intravenous hypnosis correctly with music students. And we went over his procedure, and I said, yes, you're doing exactly the right thing. It'll be helpful to have your music students rehearse in their mind and then put that into practice. Just as he was going out of the door, he said, do you like rock music? And I said, just last night I went to hear the Grateful Dead. Then you heard me perform. Well, that opened up a whole chapter of my life because Mickey Hart and I became friends. I became friends with every member of the Grateful Dead. And through the Grateful Dead and Mickey Hart, I met Rolling Thunder, the intertribal medicine man. And that was a relationship that lasted for 20 decades and became actually an international event when I went with him to Europe and did workshops in Germany. So, again, a chaos here, a very small event can have unpredictable events, and that one comment from Mickey Hart is an example of that.
And you are well known. So much of your writing has been in the field of indigenous practices, shamanism. Um, I think in terms of uh, a white American, you were far ahead of your time in that area. I wonder if you could just share some of what kept you wanting to learn from indigenous practices and about indigenous practices.
Well, I was born on a farm, and this was in the days before tractors. And my father plowed the field with a horse and a plow, and every now and again he would unearth an anglehead. And so I started to research. I found out that the Rappahannock Indians lived in that area, and this is what got me interested in Native Americans. And then once I became interested in Native Americans, of course, I became interested in medicine men and medicine women. And then at the conference, I was on a panel with Grandmother Twyla Nitch, a Seneca elder, and she was the first shaman who I met. I became very much interested in shamans because back in those days, the psychiatric diagnosis was that shamans were psychotic. And I didn't find that was true at all. This got me interested in interviewing more shamans. Actually, I interviewed shamans from all the inhabited continents, all 6 of them, and have written literally dozens of articles about shamanism and have introduced shamanism into a discussion whenever I could. I was recently in Ecuador for a conference on consciousness and the brain, and I gave my paper on shamanism because I thought that you can't really discuss consciousness without touching on shamanism because they were the first people who used consciousness for ritual and for healing in a disciplined way. Good heavens, I have had so many wonderful experiences with shamans and have been invited to very private events, Brazil, South Africa, etc., by shamans who appreciated my interest and my support for them.
I wonder if you can just say what the word shaman means to you, just in a more general way, just so people that maybe aren't so familiar with it can follow along.
Well, different tribes, of course, use different words for shamans. In Brazil, for example, the tribe usually were the Page, P-A-G-E, P-A-J-E. And so the word will differ from tribe to tribe, from part of the world to the other. But to be a shaman, one has to be community-based. It's the community that decides who's a shaman, who isn't. One doesn't just say, oh, I'm a shaman, hang up a shingle and start shamanizing. That's not how it works. The community is the one who determines who is a shaman, who is not. Now, to be a shaman, one needs to be able to access information that other members of the community cannot access. How do they access the information? Well, mainly by altering their consciousness, by journeying into another realm, by talking with plants, by ingesting plants, by doing any number of things that give them information that can be used for rituals and for healing. And then that is the third aspect of the definition. Once shamans have the information, they use it in service of the community. So shamanism is very community-based, and that is what separates shamans from other practitioners who do similar things. There's so many examples I could give you. Sometimes a shaman gets very, very ill, And as they're close to death, they have a vision, and the spirit guide teach them how to get well. And then once they get well, the price they need to pay is to help other people get well. And sometimes it's a member of the family who gets ill. Vaughan was a shaman in Indonesia who I spent a day with. And she was living a happy life. And then her son got very, very ill, close to death. And she had a dream when an elder from her tribe, Indigenous tribe, said, "Here is a stone. You need to put the stone on your son's forehead 3 times a day. And in 3 days, he will be well." So she did that, and he got well. But then the spirit guides say, "Now, you need to follow the instructions we will give you in dreams, and we will teach you how to become a healer." A dukun is the Indonesian for shaman. And so that's how she became a dukun. And I was with her, watching her deal with a couple of dozen patients during the day. Quite masterful, fascinating experience.
I wonder if you can share any thoughts on how shamanism, what it might teach us in the context of our own healing as individuals in the United States, what shamanism might teach us about what healing is.
Well, yes, and a couple of things for shamanism. In the first place, shamans use a number of herbal preparations, and many of them have been put to the test, and they do have healing ingredients. Maybe aspirin from the sarsaparilla plant is an example of that. But shamans also use herbal preparations, which were really inert. They really didn't have any healing properties. But people got healed anyway because of what they call the placebo effect. And a skilled practitioner, medical practitioner, will know how to use placebos in a constructive way to help their patients. Also, another thing we can learn from shamans is the importance of ritual. Shamans would always dress up in a particular costume, and that helped the healing, just like physicians and nurses generally wear a white uniform or something like that, a stethoscope, which they rarely use, but that's part of the regalia. And again, that has a healing effect. And I think that in this day and age, we have to remember that shamans were earlier uses of what I call psychedelic plants. Now, not all shamans use psychedelics. Most of them, if not all of them. And now psychedelics have been found to have wonderful healing properties, more effective for trauma and depression than just about anything else. Well, we have shamans to thank for that because they were the pioneers.
In terms of psychedelic use for healing specifically, how does one approach that in a way that, let's say we're not a part of one of a traditional culture? How does one approach that in a way that fosters healing and respect?
I think that practitioners need to give thanks to the whole tradition of shamans in their writing or even just privately, and realize that they were not the first ones to discover ayahuasca or mescaline, psilocybin, etc. And they also can learn from the shamans in terms of the effective way to use, in terms of the context. There are 3 important aspects to psychedelic therapy. And One is the setting, the place where it takes place, whether in a doctor's office or the tribal village. What is the set, the expectation, and the purpose that the client is coming for, and what is the substance? Make sure that the ingredients are active and pure and effective. So those are the three S's that the shamans have taught us in terms of the proper use of psychedelics. I should say that my Brazilian friends took me to a number of indigenous tribes, and that's where I discovered ayahuasca for the first time. And of course, it's called by different terms in different parts of Brazil, in different parts of Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, etc. And as soon as I took ayahuasca, of course, I realized the potential. Just like the first time I took psilocybin in 1962, I realized the potential for psychotherapy and all for the study of consciousness. So it was like an epiphany. And now, of course, there have been any number of studies of ayahuasca, and there's an endless parade of people, shall we say Westerners, coming to Brazil and Peru to have private sessions with shamans. We might often call this psychedelic tourism, and let's hope that this is tourism in the best sense of the word, where they give as well as receive.
I'm not sure danger is the right word, but that if we're approaching this and people are traveling to do this, that there needs to be this understanding of reciprocity in that process. It seems like you're pointing to that.
Good grief. Indigenous people have been ripped off so often over the centuries.
Yes.
This is just another example. And as I say, fine. If you go to visit a ayahuasca center with real authentic shamans to administer ayahuasca for whatever purpose you're going for, make sure you give something back. And so it's a two-way street, absolutely. An experience I had a number of years ago in Brazil when I was at a university in Brasilia called the University of Peace. And there was a conference going on at the same time, coincidentally, where some 36 shamans from equatorial parts of Brazil had camped out by a waterfall. Why? Because some doctors had come to their tribe, had taken the shamans off to the journey, purportedly to study plants, while other doctors drew blood from the tribal members. And then why did they draw blood? Because they sold the blood to companies who were trying to find out how these men and women living in the equatorial area could stand the heat. Well, this, of course, was piratism. And what the shamans did was to draft a manifesto, the Manifesto of Indigenous People, and they did me the great honor of giving it to me to take back to the United States and publicize, to bring this horrible situation to the attention of people. And I translated it, put it on the internet, published it in a number of journals, and immediately Harvard University, oh, those doctors are not really from Harvard, and they were angry at me for lambasting Harvard. Well, the doctors claimed they were from Harvard, so what was I to say? And the publicity that I gave this manifesto really seemed to work, because shortly afterwards, a film crew went to Brazil, and when they were clearing customs, their baggage was examined for hypodermic needles, etc. That, well, we don't want to just steal blood from our Indians. So that manifesto and my small part in it really made a big change in stopping that practice of drawing blood from the Indians and selling it on the internet.
Gosh, it's just hard to imagine that that's what was happening. I wanted to ask you another question about your book. You call yourself a pioneer in humanistic psychology. What does it mean to you to use that way of identifying yourself, to be a humanistic psychologist?
Okay, that was not my title. I would never call myself a pioneer. I'm too modest to make a claim like that. That was the publisher's title.
Okay.
But to answer your question, I was not one of the original pioneers in humanistic psychology. That honor goes back to people like Abraham Maslow and Sidney Girard, who were around much more before I came into the scene. I suppose by contemporary standards, I go back several decades. And so let's not worry about that particular term. Let's just focus on humanistic psychology. Maslow and Girard and Sudich and the others, the real pioneers, came into the picture. Psychology was split into two different camps. One was the psychoanalytic camp. One was the behavioral camp. And I should say three different camps. And the third camp was the cognitive camp. So we had cognitive psychology, behavioral psychology, psychoanalytic psychology. And so humanistic psychology said, none of these camps are paying enough attention to human potential, to the positive aspects of humanity. They're dealing with either things that can be easily measured or pathological aspects of the human condition. What about creativity? What about spirituality? What about love? So this is how humanistic psychology came into the picture. And now humanistic psychology has its own division in the American Psychological Association, Division 32, the Society for Humanistic Psychology. And now it's really a vital force in psychology, and it has actually impacted some of the other aspects of psychology as well. And of course, we have the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, a couple of other journals along those lines, some very good research that's been done, very good theory that's been done, and of course, a number of humanistic psychotherapies that are being practiced.
And what is meaningful to you specifically about describing yourself as a humanistic psychologist?
A humanistic psychologist needs to be put into context. Psychology can be defined as the disciplined study of behavior and experience. Now, humanistic psychology focuses on all aspects of behavior and experience, but especially those aspects which emphasize what it is to be human, being a loving person, being somebody who is looking for connection, being somebody who's interested in spiritual aspects, being somebody who is interested in exploring the depths of their own psyche and also of the family or the community that they're working with. Now, this is all very radical at the time humanistic psychology started, not so radical anymore because, as I say, the pioneering aspects of humanistic psychology have been absorbed, at least in part, in other aspects of psychology as well.
What's it like for you to see or view the field of psychology as it is today, from where you are now? What do you see about it?
Well, I think that psychology has certainly come into its own because you see psychology in so many aspects of human behavior, and psychological terms are part of mainstream thought and writing, and such terms as sibling rivalry, Freudian slip, other terms that are no longer bizarre, they're part of the common parlance. So psychology has become very much a part of mainstream life. And there have been a number now of, this goes back decades, books about how to raise a child with psychological principles, how to run an organization with psychological principles, how to use psychological principles to enhance your own life. Humanistic psychology has not really impacted politics, very much sad to say, but it certainly has impacted other aspects of life.
Stan, you're about to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association of Transpersonal Psychology. And I just wanted to ask you, what's it like to receive this recognition?
Well, you're too young to know who Bennett Cerf was, but he was an outstanding humorist back in the 1940s, 1950s. And toward the end of his life, he was getting a number of awards. And he said, well, I'm getting another Get Him Up for You Folks Award. So another quotation that comes to mind from another show business personality, when Katharine Hepburn won her 4th Academy Award, she said, well, if you live long enough, anything can happen. So I would say that summarizes my reaction. And of course, it's a great honor. Transpersonal psychology is sort of an offshoot of humanistic psychology. And transpersonal psychology emphasizes behavior and experience that goes beyond the socially constructed sense of identity. It emphasizes a spiritual connection to transcendental realms, all through the archetypes in the collective unconscious. Those are vertical, and also horizontal, emphasizing connections with nature. I think transpersonal psychology puts more of an emphasis upon human connections with the rest of nature than other aspects of psychology. And then transpersonal psychology puts an emphasis on transformation, how to use all of this for personal and social transformation and change. So, again, great honor, and I'm very happy that I've been, shall we say, in the forefront of activities involving humanistic psychology, notably the excellent Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, of which I'm on the editorial board. And I think that just recently, I gave a video performance to the Russian Society of Transpersonal Psychology, very, very active group, and they held a big convention in St. Petersburg, and they really wanted me to do a video clip, which I was happy to do, talking about how transpersonal psychology is so important in the world today. So transpersonal psychology is certainly alive and well. And then I've also been editing a book by T.X. Barber, the famous social psychologist who died before he could finish it. And that book is called The Physical and Mental Universe. And that is really a book about transpersonal psychology, although he wrote the book before he knew about the term transpersonal psychology. So I'm very active at that particular field. And so it's, of course, a great honor to get that award. And more importantly, the event will be in a location where I'll be able to see some friends of mine person to person who I'd not seen for a long time. That'll be a very gala event. Thank you for mentioning that.
Well, I'm excited for you, and I'm glad that you will be able to see some friends there. I'm glad that you defined transpersonal psychology because I think sometimes it gets left out of the more mainstream approaches to therapy specifically. And as you said, the connection with nature and social change, these are things that are connecting our personal psychology to the ecological awareness seems never more relevant, never more important than now as we're confronting some of the changes in the environment. I wonder, is there anything that you would like to say to transpersonal psychologists, consciousness researchers, people who are just coming up in the field, those fields? What's important that they know about the field or where we are now collectively? Anything like that?
I think that newcomers to the field of transpersonal psychology need to become familiar with the research that's been done, especially the research by Harris Friedman, who's actually developed a pencil and paper test on self-transcendence. And so transpersonal psychology can be just as disciplined and research-oriented as humanistic or cognitive or behavioral or psychoanalytic psychology. And as I said before, they should be familiar with the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology because that is filled with theoretical and research-oriented papers, also biographies, first-person experiences, really a wealth of information on transpersonal psychology.
And the research inventory that you were citing, can you say the name of that one more time?
Just go to the
test?
internet, Harris Friedman,
Harris Friedman.
and his test for self-transcendence.
Test self-transcendence. Wonderful.
Yes, it's very well put together, been used in a number of studies, and easily available.
Thank you, Stan. Well, is there anything else that you want to share about either your memoir or any reflections that you just want to put out there?
Anybody who buys my memoirs should try to get the digital version because then you can read the chapters that were left out of the printed version. And in that digital version, for example, you may read about my early childhood experiences, but also a number of interviews, including the one I had with Martin Luther King before he became famous, where I gave him a tour of the Northwestern University campus and went to his 3 nights of lectures, took copious notes, and that was, again, one of those experiences that changed my life because back in those days, what he was advocating and what he was standing for was so far ahead of its time. And I'm so glad that I had that early contact with him.
Wow, that's really special that you did get to have that contact. So you're saying in general the digital version of the book has your notes on Martin Luther King and your interactions, and there are other stories that the digital version has that the printed copy doesn't have.
And the digital version is less expensive too.
Okay. And where's the best place to get the digital version?
You can get it from University Professors Press. It should be easy to get. If not, people can write to me personally, and I will give them the information. Thank you for getting a plug to the book. Also, I should mention that another book of mine, Dream Telepathy, which I co-authored with Montague, Ullman, the famed psychoanalyst, about our telepathy experiments at my Montague Medical Center, has come out in its 50th anniversary edition. That book has never gone out of press, happy to say. And now it's come out in a very, very beautiful 50th anniversary edition, happy to say.
Congratulations. That's remarkable. That's Dream Telepathy that you wrote with Montague Ullman. Can you say just a little bit more about the experiments?
Yes, basically for people who want to visualize it, we had a sender and a receiver. And the receiver had electrodes attached to his or her head, put into a soundproof room where the experimenter would monitor brainwaves and rapid eye movements, while the sender would shoot an envelope randomly, go up to a different part of the building, or sometimes a different city, open it, and there would be an art print. And they would try to send the art print to the sleeping participant. The participant would try to reach out and get the art print. And I know all of this sounds fantastic, but it worked. We did 10 years of experiments and published the results in leading journals, psychiatric journals. And we actually had replications in other laboratories that also worked. Now, go to Wikipedia, they deny all of that. Wikipedia just is filled with lies. I just hope people don't go to Wikipedia to read about me. It's filled with lies. Just go to the internet and you will find any number of reviews of that particular series of experiments. I can give you just one little example of what people would be interested in. Not only were our experiments repeated, but once you repeated another person's experiment. Charles Church was a known transpersonal psychologist, and he had a laboratory. And a young woman came to him who claimed that she had out-of-the-body experiences. And so he'd fine, I'm going to attach electrodes to your head and watch the EEG. And if you have the out-of-body experience, go to the top of the room, you'll see a little shelf and repeat the numbers. Believe it or not, she did that. And she repeated the 5 numbers correctly. So what we did in our laboratory was to cover all of the bases that Tarek did not cover, because he knew the number and he was also running the experiment. We used one of our art prints, chosen randomly, and we had a medical student who claimed to have out-of-body experiences. And we said, if you have an out-of-body experience, go to the top of the room, look on the shelf, and describe what you see. Well, sure enough, there were some unusual EEG tracing. And then he spoke to the microphone. I just got back from the top of the room, and that hit an image of a sunset. And sure enough, the picture at the top of the room was perspective on a perfect sunset. And people don't read about sunsets very often. So that was a replication in its own right. Yes, there's so many replications of parapsychological experiments that are simply ignored by people who claim that this just couldn't exist and couldn't happen. In our own laboratory, and again, I could go on endlessly, but one night, the picture that was chosen randomly was a painting by Saul Bellows, both members of the club, a boxing match. Well, the sleeping subject, that I had a dream that I went to Madison Square Garden to buy tickets for a boxing match. And there were posters of boxers. And that was odd because I have no interest in boxing. I would never buy tickets for a boxing match. But sure enough, that was the image that was the target for that particular night.
Wow. That's really, really just fascinating that you were able to study that in that way and to set up that experiment. So the book Dream Telepathy, is there a place that people can find that as well, or is it
Usually available, yes.
easily
By
available?
Montague Ullman myself.
Okay, and
Montague Ullman was the genius who developed the whole notion of doing it. And I designed the experiments, and we worked together as a team for 10 years. That's right.
I will put both of those books in a link in the bottom of the video so that anyone listening that wants to take a look at them, that'll be there.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you, Stan. Anything else that you want to share before we wrap up?
I think that programs like yours are so important because they awaken people with a sense of wonder that's often missing in our world today. And there are exceptional experiences that people don't dare talk about because people that think that they're crazy or lying. Not at all. These experiences are part of the human condition, and they can enhance our life because they show that there's a connection between all of us, that there is a love bond between all of us, whether we know it or not, and not only between humans, but humans and the rest of nature. So I think this is the big lesson to learn from what we've been talking about today.
Thank you for that, Stan. I agree. I'm so glad to get to speak with you and to talk about your work and your just amazing and multitudinous contributions to all of us around that. I just think it's so important, especially as our environment suffers, we suffer. And so the most salient thing is exactly as you said, to know that we have access to this way of experiencing our environment as us and that we aren't separate from it. And so thank you for just all your many tremendous contributions to that realization for all of us.
You're so welcome, and again, thank you for having me.
Thresholds of Consciousness is a production of Madrone Hollow Productions, all rights reserved. This is a listener-supported podcast. If you're moved to contribute to the production of this podcast, please see the link in the description below.